zero. It's another way of saying this is a pretty crummy regression. So you've got to keep working at it. So the next thing I did is I said, well, I know that in the retail industry, there are two ways to make your revenues grow. One is you put in more stores. Okay. The other one is you get what are known as growing same-store sales. For the stores that are in place, you'd like them to be selling at least as much tomorrow as they are today. Okay? So one thing that stores always report is same-store sales. And I kept it simple. I said, all I'm really interested in is how many stores they have. I'm assuming that all the stores are selling about the same amount. This is all stuff that you can dig into when you're looking at these things. And I can get this from the annual reports too. In the case of Lowe's, it was really, really easy. In the case of Home Depot, I had to dig a little bit. But I've got how many stores there are. And now I'm going to do what's known as a multivariate regression, where I'm not only going to regress the revenues against the starts, but I'm going to regress it against both the starts, which is an economic variable, and the number of stores, which is a variable that management is working on. Okay? And I can show you how you do a multivariate regression in Excel. And then when it comes to making a forecast, I already did this last time, the housing starts, I did that. And now what I did was really, really simple-minded. I put down here a little cell that says I'm going to increase the stores by 30 stores a year, based on past history of what I saw them doing with their store growth. In fact, that number is way too high, because if you look at it here, they basically haven't been growing their stores at all over the past couple of years.
Yeah. One question. So if they go overseas and if they go to a different country and open the store, does that count?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, if you were being really, really careful, you might make one model for the U.S. and one model for China, if because they're not going to behave the same. But again, this is when you really start to dig into these things, then you start looking at it much more closely. But I just assumed all stores are the same. Okay? No, I thought someone was knocking on the door. So I assumed that they were going to grow 30 stores a year. The way I set this up, if I change this to 5, all those numbers would change and the chart would look different. But we'll go back. If I can find the little back arrow. There it is. Okay. Now, though, let's go down and look at the T-stats here. And these T-stats look a little bit different. My R-squared, and I want this adjusted R-squared, tells me that I caught about 87% of the ups and downs with those two variables. Okay? That's good. These numbers tell me that these T-stats are all really, really big, so these coefficients are really good. Okay? And then I can use this formula that I got here to do a forecast. And if you go up into one of these cells, you'll see that what the cell says is take what's in C30, which is that, and multiply it by what's in E16, which is that, and then add it to what's in C29, that, and multiply it by that. That's all it is. And I've got a forecast for their revenues. Okay? So the reason I wanted you to pull all that stuff was because I wanted you to start forecasting the revenues. Now, I've also got it for Home Depot here. Now, what you use is not going to be starts necessarily, but it's the same idea. You try to find some simple explanation for what's driving those numbers. And I will tell you that for virtually any retail operation, the number of stores is going to be in that equation. Okay? So that's one. What you use for the other, you can use consumer confidence, you can use, whether you use GDP or disposable income is almost irrelevant because the two more or less move in lockstep. I mean, ideally you would use disposable income, but you're not going to see much difference. You might want to find some sort of variable for consumer confidence, and that might work. Now, the next step, and then I'm going to go back and show you how you do some of these things. The next step is you want to take this revenue number and convert it to a profit number. And that's why I asked you to calculate that common I went out of my head. The common size income statement. Because among the things that you'll see when you calculate, and I just simplified it here, when you do the common size income statement, is you'll get a gross profit margin, gross profits as a function of revenues. You'll get an operating profit margin after you get the sales, the SG&E out. You'll get a net profit margin, which is after you take out the depreciation, the interest, the taxes, and all that. And then I've got two ROE lines, which I'm going to use for a different reason later on. But if you look here for this thing, the gross profits started out here for both companies at about 30% and ended up here for both companies at about 34.5%. Any thoughts on what that's telling you?
They make similar profit.
I'm sorry?
They make almost the same profit.
They're both making the same amount of gross profit off of their sales, but why has it gone from 30-odd% to...
Because they have more stores, so they have more...
No,
they sell more.
Because this is as a percent, so it's not going to affect the stores. The difference between revenue and gross profit is cost of goods. Okay? So another way of saying this is their cost of goods as a percent of their revenues has gone down. Okay? And what does that sort of say to you?
They become more efficient.
How? They have become more efficient, but how? What have they done?
They decrease the cost per unit and produce.
But how did they do it?
Go overseas to China.
Go to China. Go to China. Buy your goods in China. Cheaper. You see? This is known as outsourcing, is one thing. You can just simply improve the quality of your channels. You know, get the goods delivered more quickly so you don't have a lot of inventory sitting there. And if you were to look at some of the other numbers, you'd see that their inventory turn has gone up. And these kinds of things. And in fact, if you were to read the Lowe's statement, you would see that management says getting their inventory turn faster is one of their key objectives. So this is the kind of thing that you sort of start to see from the numbers. But now let's go down here. Now we'll go to the operating margin, which both started out, this is 9.6, this is 10. Now as we go through time, this one is 9.5, and this one is 6.5. If the first one meant that they got more efficient. What does this one mean? They got less efficient. And what might have gone on here? What's the difference between your variable profit and your profit after variable costs and your profit after fixed costs? Remember, these guys built lots of stores. Stores mean cost, unless the stores actually produce revenue. They're a drag. And in fact, if you were to go back and go in and read the annual reports for these companies, which I didn't ask you to do on these two, you'll find that in Lowe's case in particular, they're closing stores. They're saying, you know, this is a real problem. We built too many stores. We've got to sort of change what we were trying to do. Okay? We overbuilt. We've got too much cost, and that's why it happened. Now, this is important to sort of look at these numbers and try to figure out what's going on, because it's going to affect how you do your forecast. You know, okay, we screwed up, we built too many stores, we've got too much cost. We want to reduce the cost. The first question you're going to ask is, how quickly can you reduce it, guys? We see how quickly the city of LA manages to reduce their costs. They can't. You know, how quickly can they reduce their costs? You know, it's these kinds of questions that you got to try to get out of the numbers. Okay, lots of times these things turn out. So if you look at the profit margins, now profits, you can think of going essentially from this line down to this one, it's taxes, more or less. I mean, there's more there, but it's basically. You know, you can see that they started out, for every $100 they made, they got $5.60 in profit. These guys started out making $6.30. And then you sort of follow these numbers through, and at the end of the day, these guys are making less than $4, and these guys are making $5.50. Both of their profit margins have compressed, which of course is going to happen in a bad economy, because you can't do anything about your overhead in the short run, and if your sales are sort of sluggish, your profit margins get squeezed. But there's more going on here. These profit margins are being squeezed because of that, too. Okay? So they've got a challenge. They've got crappy profit margins, and they know that the reason they've got it is their cost structure is too high. And again, if you read the annual report, you'll see that that's what management is focused on. Okay? So I also calculated over here what the average of these margins is going to be, has been over the past couple of years. Because the next step in this little exercise